Hey folks, Steve here with another Fatal Alliances The Great War video. This is part 2 of my setup guidance, I guess mini-series, as I prepare a game for being played and eventually get to some good examples. At the end of my last video in part 1, I talked through how setup is performed, and I had set up for us Austria-Hungary in really simple terms, just running through and setting up the basic fronts that you would expect, the Serbian and border with Russia fronts. Now, since then, offline, away from the camera, since it's time consuming, I've gone through the next couple of steps of setup, and I'm going to talk to what I did and how I did it rather than drag you through each step of the way. Um, in the setup charts, after Austria-Hungary is complete, you skip past Italy because you only set up when it's activated. You skip past Ottoman Empire because they don't set up until activated as well. Same thing with China. And then you get to Japan. And Japan, without getting too deep in the trenches on this, pardon the pun, Japan has very special mechanics in this game. And I would advise you to go read the rulebook and read that particular section and what it how it really pertains to the game. I guess Japan had this unique role in the time period of being against the Central Powers, but they weren't necessarily the best of buds with the Allies either. And so, real quick, if you were to look at that setup, you're going to notice a couple of things. It has 3 rows in the setup chart. The bottom one, is Japan if activated. So when the country becomes fully activated, you would add the units in that row to the game. But the first 2 say anywhere GE controlled and anywhere CW controlled. Now, the anywhere there, again, is more like anywhere that Japan has control. But on the world map, submap of the game, and here in the Vassal module, I have sort of set up according to the charts. Basically, I set these stacks of units up here, and I used a feature within Vassal to change label and said if activated here. So all these counters have the if activated tag on them, including these counters. For some reason, this plane didn't get one. I couldn't set it for some reason. So they can be pretty much ignored in the game until later. I'll just leave them out there. And then everything in the anywhere GE controlled, I set up here in Japan, just mainland Japan, and I gave them the label GE controlled. And I just sort of set them up, not too much thought put into it, just trying to maintain stacking and putting an interesting combination together. Know that in the world map you can stack 4 units plus 1 division, 4 core size units plus a division, instead of 2 plus a division on the rest of the European map. So they're set up here, and then the CW controlled are set up here. Just in real brief, how this functions and how this works for Japan is the GE-controlled Japanese units are controlled by Germany on their impulse to take action. And same with the CW, they're controlled on the Allied impulse by the Commonwealth. And how this is sort of set up is the purpose of the CW units is to basically try to take out German naval units in the Pacific theater and outside of Europe, while the GE-controlled units, and this is where it gets weird, are going to be controlled by the German player to take German holdings in Asia and in the Pacific. You can see there's a couple out here, Truk, Kwajalein, Rabaul. These are locations that Germany controls at the beginning of the game and could count for victory points at the end if they retain them. If the Japanese controlled units manage to take these hexes, these objective hexes, and a few other things that are tied up in those roles that I mentioned, the Germans will get half a victory point, or half an objective per objective controlled by the Japanese. Now, you might ask, why would the German player use these Japanese units to deprive him or herself of these objectives? Well, half of a victory point is better than 0 victory points. The Allied player is going to be doing what they can to send forces out of Australia up to take these, like they did historically, from Germany, sort of a race to beat Japan to take them. So there's sort of a mini game over here where the German player's sort of making it easy on himself to let Japan take his objectives, so he can at least save some of his objectives over here while the Commonwealth is doing what they can to nab them up. So that's how that's set up, and why it's a little weird. But setup's relatively easy. There's not that many units set up. You basically just want to make sure you've got units in a port, and I sort of had to put this in the wrong hex just so I can maintain the stack for usability's sake. But you want your units and your ships in a port so that you can eventually do naval attacks out of the home islands to take stuff. After Japan is Russia, and for the most part, Russia is mostly going to be setting up on the Europe map. I've already set up, and to give you some idea of what I've done here, there's some things like the naval units which have set locations, and then you can just get a ton of units to put into Europe, 20 infantry and a bunch of other crazy stuff. In short, what I've done is provided a really basic lineup here against Hungary. Not heavy, mind you. This is all relatively weak, but I did dedicate a headquarters unit for ease of supply and one scout plane to assist in taking Lemberg and this resource and this city, Sardani. These should be easy pickups, hopefully, and then I can just hold the line, ideally. I also put some defensive forces in Poland. Not that I expect these guys here in Hungary to be punching through, but I wanted to make sure it was defended at least a little bit. Also dedicating one of our HQs, and I put the forts that the Russians get here in Lodz, with the idea that I kind of want to protect this as much as I can, because the longer Poland can hold out, the better in the game for the Russians. And then up in the north, I've put a few garrisons just in the coastal cities to protect from maybe some sneaky German amphibious assaults. There's one up here in St. Petersburg as well with the North Baltic Fleet. And I put the convoy points up there just because I didn't think there was any better place to put them yet. Maybe should have put them over in Vladivostok, but I'm not going to sweat it for this game. And then my main sort of, I guess, driving force I wanted to start with here are in this northern wing that are going to be set to go to Königsberg and Danzig. This was a sort of, I think, the Russians' initial push in history. So I put some cavalry and some engineer units up here, as well as decently strong infantry. The engineers are set up here to help crossing the river. I also have one of our headquarters units and some other decent corps with artillery all along here, as well as the best early game bomber in the game, pretty much, which is the Meromets. I'm probably saying that wrong. Bomber. It's a build point 4 bomber, which most countries don't start with. It's very good. It's got quite a bit of range. Going to be very useful here. Now, of course, Germany's going to set up in reaction to this, and we'll see how that goes in another video, probably part 3. But the idea here being that this artillery will help weaken German forces in this little pocket here, and then I'll proceed to move forward with all of these units with the aim to get into Königsberg and eventually Danzig, hoping that these other sections here, the Polish forces and the Hungarian front forces, can at least move forward and sort of maintain the defensive line while these guys drive it here. And assuming, if I'm the Russian player and I can get these 3 areas here, Königsberg, Danzig, Gdynia, if I can hold this, I'm going to be in really great shape. If I can get in here, hold it, continue to apply pressure to Hungary, Germany's going to be worried, essentially. So that's it for Russia. So next is the Commonwealth, and the Commonwealth is going to take up the majority of this video, even though I've already set up most of the units for the Commonwealth before this video. Real quick, if you were to look at the setup chart, there's a few things that are in the production spiral and repair pool. I've already set those up, some of which already come set up in the vassal module to begin with. Australia starts with the Anzac division. Egypt starts with an infantry. South Africa starts with a couple of units. India starts with a couple of units. And then in the UK proper, there are a few land units. The French HQ, an infantry division, and an engineer division, an infantry corps and an engineer division are in the UK itself. And then everything else in the anywhere line is where we're going to try to get thoughtful in terms of our placement. And I've already placed some stuff. So the first thing to understand when you're going to be setting up the Commonwealth, and this is going to be the real pain in the butt, I have no idea what's the best way to deal with this. You have a crap ton of ships. When you first open up a 1914 scenario in the vassal module, or if you're sitting there with your pile of counters at home, you're going to realize you have way, way, way too many ships to reasonably understand what to do with them. I don't have a great recommendation if you're trying to be ahistorical, because you're going to look at all these numbers, and if you're not really familiar with the counters, you're kind of going to be lost. And so what I would recommend you do is go out to Board Game Geek, and there is a historical UK setup PDF file that someone uploaded, and is about as close, I guess, to historical deployments of the British Navy during 1914. And that's what I've actually used here, just for the sake of ease in setting this up for you guys in the game. And so if you look there, it makes some notations on, here are the ships that were set up in the Jamaica Caribbean region. Here are the ships that are set up in Australia. And so I've done that here. You can see there's a few ships, Australia, Brisbane, and Sydney, with the Anzac Division I have set up here in Sydney. Probably would be better to maybe set them up in Brisbane just to get up north without moving. So maybe I'll make that quick change here. Just, it might make sense to be in Sydney. It's a major port. Yeah. But so is Brisbane, and Brisbane connects to the Coral Sea, which makes it easier to get to Rabaul, for instance. So probably better to set them up here. Then there's a couple of ships in Singapore. Not too many. Not a big deal. One ship in India, and here are the Indian units that we had to set up with an artillery unit. The Indian units, if you're having trouble finding them, are this side box of the infantry force pool in the vassal module. And then in Europe itself, or the European map, I got, along with the infantry corps we set up in Port Said, which I just sort of arbitrarily picked a place. There's a few units that I put into Alexandria to cover the canal, and a few units in Malta. And then obviously a huge amount of ships are going to be in Scapa Flow. And I also decided to put a few of these in Portsmouth so that they can help protect the English Channel, as well as the CW sub-unit. Someone on the Board Game Geek forums pointed out that the sub is not out here in the setup at the beginning, and it's not even in the force pool like it ought to be. It should have been here, and it's not when you first open up the file. What you need to do is pull that sub counter from the counters area. So you click this button, navigate to CW, navigate to Naval, then Others, and it's sub A. How you know it's sub A is the right one. It's the 1906 build date. So it is the starting sub for CW. So I set them up here along with these ships, and then obviously this huge stack up in Scapa Flow, ready to go for the Battle of Jutland at a moment's notice. I sort of randomly picked the ships to put at the British or in the English Channel. I'm not sure it really matters. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when we actually try to have a big naval battle. There's so many counters to deal with. I do suggest using some sort of holding box or something if you're playing in person, so you don't have this huge stack of counters you're going to knock over. We had trouble with that in our game, and we just sort of had to be loose with where the counters actually were on the map and saying yeah they're all in Scapa Flow or what have you. Then in addition to that, we have some transport ships and a crap ton of convoy points. and some other units that we can set up anywhere. And so I've sort of thrown them all over here. Uh, I put 2 transports from that anywhere over here, and I kept them separate just for ease of description. I put them here in Portsmouth with the idea that they can be used to ferry British units from here to France in the inevitable defense of France against German invasion. And so I want to dedicate a couple here just to make it easy to quickly ferry troops over. The other 2 are kind of floating, and we're going to decide where we want to put them. Same thing with Kitchener. He's got a couple of corps and some divisions and some artillery that we can kind of put wherever we want to. And we also have these 6 territorial units. I did draw them from the territorial force pool. These are units that are going to show up or go somewhere on the map and pretty much stay there. And because you're drawing from the pool, you're going to end up with a few left over in the pool. That's fine. And so real quick, I just want to talk through where we're placing these. So this is South African territorial, so we can put them in South Africa. South Africa's on both maps, so just watch out. I'm going to very lamely try to drag this over to where it needs to be. I'm going to throw it in Cape Town. So there we go. That guy's done. Then we've got a couple of Indian territorials, which we will put on the map. And what we'll do is we'll just set them up in Calcutta. Since that is an objective, we want to protect that, and that's fine. Next is Nigeria, and this is gets to the weird sort of small section of the map down here where there are a bunch of these world map hexes along the edge, and Nigeria. Let's see, where is it on here? It's not immediately where you think it would be. It's kind of weird. It's showing these different chunks of Africa, not the whole continent, so it's hard to find sometimes. AE Sudan. Fairly confident I can find that. I mean, if this was a map of the world, I could show you pretty easily, but finding it on this map is a little bit different. And AE Sudan, I believe I can place that here. And then we have an Australian territorial, which obviously is going to be a pretty easy plug, and maybe we'll put maybe put them in Perth. Probably don't need to, but there you go. So next we need to think about where do we want these transports, and where do we want to put the rest of these forces. Now, being a little metagamey, you can probably imagine that we are going to need to put some stuff, I'm going to get rid of that, in, we're going to need to put stuff in Egypt. And so what I think I want to do is, let's see, I want to put, yeah, you know what, I think I'll just put all of these guys, or maybe most of them, here in Egypt. So again, excuse the dragging and dropping here as I try to get to where it needs to be. I'm going to just put all these guys in Egypt because you got to figure we're going to end up fighting the Turk, right? And so we are probably going to want to have this set up in such a way that we can move up the Levant without too much pain and suffering. I've got this division now I don't know what to do with. We'll just throw them. We'll throw them back up here. We'll put them in London just in case the Germans get sneaky, and then as we bring more units on the board, it can move into France later. So that's pretty easy, right? And just for the sake of my sanity, I'm going to save my progress here for my save file that I will try to upload at some point here in the future once everything is set up so that you can start a game with everything set up at the mercy of my poor strategy, of course. Now we've got to deal with the 96 convoy points for the UK. And the rest of the video is going to be talking about why we're going to set up the convoys the way we're going to, and this is probably going to be pretty rough because I'm going to do this kind of on the fly, though I've done it before in setting up other games, so I'm kind of familiar with what I want to do. Here's what you need to keep in mind. So if this is your first time playing the game and you're playing with a group, if you're the newbie, don't play the Commonwealth just because there's a lot to worry about. If you have no choice, then let the person who is reading the rules the most be the Commonwealth player, because there's a lot going on in terms of logistics that you have to kind of always be keeping in mind. And if you're playing this game for the first time, you might set up your convoys all wrong and kind of have a bad game to start with until you can adjust it. Because it is kind of tough. I mean, it's one of those weird things where you're expected to set up and be able to play, but unless you really understand the significance of the decisions you're making here, it's going to be a tougher game. So before I can start placing these, I need to talk about the production system of this game. I don't want to go too deep into it, but this is actually one of the parts of World in Flames that I really appreciate. That I really like. As complicated as it can seem, and as all the logistical nightmares that it can seem, because of the way it's designed, decisions and actions and consequences really matter when it comes to supply and production and all of that stuff. There are real consequences to having your convoys destroyed by German U-boats and everything like that. How it works is that for every country, not just the Commonwealth, you have in your territory a combination of resources and factories. Factories are these smokestack symbols in various hexes. You can see some hexes have 2. That means there are 2 factories there. You can see some of them are different colors. That relates to, some, if your enemy captures a space, can use a certain color factory. I think it's red factories they can use, if I recall. It's so that you can't ramp out of control with taking territory. You can't use every factory that that your enemy has when you take their land. But anyway, so the idea is you have these factories, cool, and you can tell that obviously England is fairly well industrialized. Britain is. But you must also have resources, and there are 2 types of resources in the game. There's this sort of orange resource with the shovel and pickaxe. That's sort of meant to represent any variety of base natural resources like coal, mining of metals, etc. And then you also have, in a few places that are going to be obvious, these oil symbols, these sort of oil refinery symbols. Obviously, some hexes have a value on them, so that's 3 oil resources. Some of these orange ones, they're going to mostly say 1. I think there's a few cases where it'll have multiple in the number for the orange, but usually it's 1. So a combination of orange resources and oil resources. There is no difference in this game. It is purely for flavor. In the World War II version of World in Flames, oil does matter, and it matters because mechanized warfare is much more important in that war, and you need oil to make your tanks and everything else run good. But here it's just straight up any kind of resource is what you want, and you need factories to make use of the resource. So how does that work? Well, the United Kingdom's an interesting country, and it's got some interesting, constraints to it. The United Kingdom, the Commonwealth in general, has plenty of these factories, right? It's great. But to actually get the build points for them, and it's sort of a 2-to-1 ratio. For every resource and factory you have that can play nice together, you get 1 build point in the production phase, and then there's some modifiers to that number, but we'll leave that for another video. So what you need to do is get the resources to the factories. Now, if I hide my counters for a second, that's what this button does, and bring them back, I can see within the home islands here, and I'm going to count Northern Ireland for a second. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17. 17 factories in the United Kingdom itself, home islands. Now, how many resources do we have here? Well, not too many. 1, 2. So 2 resources, 17 factories. So by itself, assuming the UK is in a vacuum, 2 resources going to any particular of these factories doesn't matter. We'll give you 2 build points. Hey, that's nice. That's nice. All good. Neato. You're going to need more resources, though, to get the 17 production that you want. And you want as much production as possible, right? Without production, you can't build units, you can't repair or attempt to repair morale, you can't do anything. So it's really important that you maintain your ability to get resources to where they need to be. Now, Germany, maybe by comparison, is all right. They've got a ton factories, they got a fair number of resources, and they're largely self-sufficient to a certain degree. Same thing with Russia. They've got plenty of factories, they've got plenty of resources for the most part. But the UK has a tougher challenge. If we look at the world map, they have resources all over Australia. They do have a factory. Now, until some kind of Factory in Flames expansion comes out for Fatal Alliances, here in Australia, this resource can get to this factory in Melbourne. Just looking around real quick. Yeah, I guess that's it. You'll get the 1 build point no matter what for these 2 places, resource and factory. But you have excess. You have 2 resources. So ideally, we need to get these 2 resources in Australia, as an example, to the UK, ideally. Now, there are some other resources out here. There's 2 in Malaya for the Commonwealth. There are 4 in Delhi, but again, there's 1. Well, I guess there's just the 1 factory, so resource in a factory, you get that build point. But now you've got 3 in India that needs transported. Let's see. Depending on a variety of other circumstances, you might be getting some other resources from around here. But just by itself, there's going to be a resource here in South Africa. And if I'm looking here on the Europe map again, if I look, there's yet another resource in South Africa. So there's 2. For France, there's 1 here in Dakar. So there's some there. Now, fortunately, it doesn't look like Egypt has any. That's fine. Cyprus has 1 for the Commonwealth. And let's see, what else? And then over in, if I spin all the way over here, you've got Canada. Now, Canada's got 1, 2 factories. Can make use of maybe these 2 resources. But then it's got 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 more resources to transfer. Then if we go down, let's move this over. If we want to look at some of the stuff going down in the Caribbean, let's see. Jamaica doesn't have any, but British Guyana has 2 resources. And then, let's see. All right, maybe that's it. And then, and I have to look at the rulebook, which I should probably get open here for myself. There are, of course, the trade agreements that are at the start of the game that are in effect. And if I'm looking here, Let's see, Persia must supply the Commonwealth with one resource each turn, and Venezuela must provide two. And if we look here, I need to find it. Here we go. They've got three. They're going to provide the Commonwealth with two. Now, of course, because of that, the UK needs to provide convoys all across the globe, to bring them to the extra factories we have on the home islands. So you start with 96, and I can go ahead and tell you, you don't have enough, I don't think, to get everything. I think I tried in one of my other games, and I could not get everything to start. You maybe need to build some. And inevitably, over the course of the war, you're going to have convoys that get destroyed, and you'll need to build more, because what you need to do, and this is a good example from the time we set up the American convoys. America is sending 3 resources to Germany. For that to work, they need, think of it sort of like a pipeline. They need, in each connecting sea area, that many running through it. So if it's 3 to get from Washington to Berlin, or at least to a German port that can go to Berlin, we need 3, 3, 3, 3, then here. If for some reason, and we'll just be arbitrary about it, for whatever reason, one of these convoys in the Pharaoh's Gap is destroyed via something, or the American player does something and it goes away, I don't know. If it goes down to 2, and okay, we'll do it that way. So it's 2. Here's the problem. If you were going to transport 3, it'd go 3, 3. It'd get to here, and we only have 2. We can't get 3 through this leg of the chain, even if we have 3 on the next end. That means, functionally, Germany's only going to get 2 of those resources. Now, some of that is enforced by the game rules, and Germany's going to get those 3 unless the Commonwealth does something about it, and the U.S. makes decisions. But if you were imagining these were a different factions' convoys, if any leg in the journey cannot sustain the throughput of what you're transferring, whether it's resources or build points, you actually can transfer build points once they've been, created. If you wanted to give another country build points instead of resources in some sort of trade agreement, you could do that, but you've got to have the throughput for it. And that's going to be the challenge, and that's where you can really disrupt the Commonwealth. If you're the central powers, I think I might have said Axis at some point earlier in this video, I'm not sure. The Central Powers, if you can disrupt even one leg of the convoy journey a little bit, that can cause major disruption to the overall ability to get resources to the United Kingdom. So, let's try, and this video is at 33 minutes now, and I don't want it to go over an hour, so we're going to try to get through this as quickly as we can. If we can get all the convoy points set up, then I will cover the French and German and Serbian deployments in a part 3 video. The rest of this will be let's get Britain set up. So first things first, I want to understand my deficit, right? So if I've got the 17 factories here, and I'll make a note to myself, 17, and we've got 2 resources. That means we have 15, we'll say, idle factories. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17. So we need to bring 15 resources to the United Kingdom. Let's figure out how we're going to do that. Just for fun, I'm going to grab one from the stack, and we'll look over to the New World, since that's technically easier to transfer here. Now, you'll start to notice that it's sort of like a thread, or maybe think of it maybe as a river, and there's multiple tributaries. Eventually, even if we're transferring stuff from the mouth of the Amazon, the Central Atlantic, I ideally want to have as few threads as possible. So I'll have my convoys meet up in maybe the East Coast, then the North Atlantic, and then on through following maybe the same chain as these American convoys. So Canadian factories, 1, 2. That means there's a surplus of 4 resources. So right away, I need 4 in, let's see. Let's see how these connect. Yeah, I need to get to the Pharaoh's Gap. So what I want to do is, if it's coming out of Quebec, we'll say Halifax, right? They are traveling along the rail lines. They get to a port. We're going to put 4, and the convoys always go in the 0 box of a sea area. 4 there. We're going to clone. So there's 4 there. We're going to put another 4 here in the North Atlantic. Clone it again. And then 4 in the Pharaoh's Gap. So that just took 12 of our convoy points to get 4 excess resources to factories so that they can be used. So that means we're now down to 11 resources to bring to the UK to fully utilize the UK. Looking back here, we have from Venezuela, there's going to be 2 convoys, so I'm going to clone that. Set this to 2. Now Venezuela connects to the Caribbean, so it's going to go here. We also want to get these 2 resources from British Guyana. So we're going to put 2 in the mouth of the Amazon. Now, here's the trick. We want all of this to flow in the easiest to protect line of convoys and try to be as efficient as we can with our convoy points. So let's look at this. We have 2 are going to leave British Guyana and the mouths of the Amazon. Those 2 are going to go through the Caribbean and meet up with these 2 in the Caribbean that are coming from Venezuela. So we need to increase this to 4 for both sets of resources to come through the Caribbean. Then they're going to come through the East Coast. They're going to meet up with the 4 existing here. So 4 plus 4 is, 8. Then that's 8. And then that's 8. So now that's gotten us 4 more. So now we're down to 7 resources needed to be full capacity. And again, looking to how many convoys we have. 2, 6, 14, 22, 30. 30 convoys used. It's not too bad, actually. I think in a previous game I totally ignored the New World, and it's probably the easiest resources to get for what you have to deal with. Okay, so now we need 7 more. Well, where can we get the 7? Well, if we look down here, we want this one from South Africa, and of course there's a another one in South Africa, if I can find it. There it is. So this resource can be transported along rails to Cape Town. So functionally, I guess you could say Cape Town has 2 resources and no factories if we wanted to choose this point. Now here's the thing. This is obviously the very bottom of Africa. And there's going to be a choice. Do you want this line of convoys to run up the coast of Africa to the home islands, or do you want them to run through the Suez, through the Mediterranean, perhaps susceptible to Central Powers attack, and then up through here? Let's see if we can do it around this way. So I'm going to grab another one of these. I'm going to make it 2. Play the drag game. If I zoomed out, it'd probably be easier to do, but I want to stay zoomed in so you can see what's going on. Okay. So we've got Cape Town, which connects in the Cape Basin Sea Zone, so 2. Clone. Whoops. Which is going to connect to the Gulf of Guinea. Which you can see this also connects to the Brazilian coast, but I think this is the most efficient way. Then around the Cape Verde Basin. Then up to Cape St. Vincent. And then cloned again till we get to the Bay of Biscay. Now, Plymouth, as well as a few other ports like Pembroke, do connect to the Bay of Biscay. So this is where the convoy line would end. Now that 2 resources requires 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 convoys. So now we're at 40 convoys used, and 5 resources to go for my own tracking. This is actually pretty good. We're not doing too bad. But now it's where it's going to get tougher, because we're running out of easy resources to transport. So what's left? Where else can we get resources? Well, it's on the Asian map. We've got some in India. If we need to get 5 more, we can do 2 of those 5 from Malaya, and then let's see, 3 of those other 5 from India. So I think as long as we can, in theory, get these sets of resources to the UK, we're good to go. Now, we might try to look down and say, well, what about these extra resources in Australia? And we could try to transport those guys. In terms of what's the, I guess, cheapest convoy, I'm not gonna do the numbers right now. Think about it like this. The Bay of Biscay is the easiest port to get to for the UK from pretty much everywhere else in the world. So as long as you can get to the Bay of Biscay, then Cape St. Vincent. So these 2, no matter what, it's probably going to come through here. Then it's, do we use Suez? So as an experiment, let's say we want to get to the Azanian Sea. And you can reasonably get to the Azanian Sea from any of these other places. How many sea zones does it take? So this is Mozambique 1. 2, 3, 4, 5 to get to Cape St. Vincent. Okay. Now let's go the other way. To Arabian Sea, 1, Red Sea, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it is longer if you're going from the Azanian Sea to go through the Mediterranean. the split point is the Arabian Sea. So if you can get resources quickly to the Arabian Sea, like all of these Indian resources, and potentially these Malayan resources, the easiest path in terms of convoys is through the Mediterranean. Um, you don't have to do it, though. You can send it down the other way. It's just a matter of your convoys. Um, let's see. Convoys are maybe susceptible to the Königsberg and some other German ships. It's tough to say. Let's do... Yeah, let's go ahead and send it through the Suez. You could maybe figure out a way to go around Africa. You might say, well, then why did they ever build the Suez Canal? Well, I don't know. For war purposes, maybe it doesn't matter. But all right, so what we're going to do, we're going to grab convoys, bring it here. So we're going to get 2 from Malaya, and Malaya's port of Malacca is on the Bay of Bengal. So that's, whoops, 2. Then as we go to the Arabian Sea, we're going to have the 2 plus the 1, 2, 3, 3 excess resources. And that will bring us to 5. Now, by doing this, we're pretty much ignoring the Persian resource. You could have... we could increase our convoys here to account for that, but I'm not going to bother to. Depending on how many convoys we have left, we can figure out what we want to do with them. So that's 5 here now, 2 from Malaya, 3 from India, 5 clone. Then I'll throw that here, wherever we end up. Close that. Now we're going to have 5 in the Red Sea. Sometime. 5 in the Red Sea. Clone. 5 in the Eastern Mediterranean. Oops, forgot to put these guys here. Transport. Then we're going to do, again, 5 in the Central Mediterranean. Clone. And then 5 in the Western. And now we need to add 5 for every other leg of the journey. So, clone. Whoops. Yeah, I'll just do that. So 2 plus the 5 is 7. Now we have 7 here. And now this needs to also be 7. So that is all of our resources required to get to all the factories that we think we need them to be at for the Commonwealth. It's not too bad. Now we just need to double check and make sure that we have all the convoy points accounted for. And then any excess, I might leave alone, or maybe we will try to figure out a way to get these Australian resources around the edge of Africa, or maybe through here. I'm not sure which one I like better. Okay, so we'll do the Red Sea path first. So 2, 7, 12, 17, 22, 27, 34, 41. Now we'll do the South Africa path, which we can start down here. We won't need to double count, right? So we're just going to count 2, 4, 6, That adds to our total, so 47. And then the New World. And we got 2, 6, 14, 32, 40. So that's 87. 87 convoys used of 96. That means we have 9 free convoys to play with, which I don't think is enough to get us where we want to be. We could maybe get one of those Australian convoys, but I think, since there's so few, what might be a better plan would be to stack these convoy points with the English Channel. Well, we'll do this. We'll put the 9 excess here, and I'll just set them aside for the sake of stack management. I'm going to put these extra 9 next to the Scapa Flow fleet with the idea that at some point the Germans are going to destroy convoys via strategic warfare, and I will need to replace them. And so these 9 can be our floating convoys. As we need to, we will send them out and replace damaged convoys. And obviously, once the game is underway, the Commonwealth should be thinking about, as needed, building new convoys to replace damaged ones. You don't want to neglect that. You might feel stressed on money to say, why am I building transports? I need to get guys and planes and ships built. Well, if you don't have convoys, you can't get money and you can't build anything. So don't forget to maintain the lifeblood of the empire. So I think that just about does it for the Commonwealth. If you've watched this and you're an expert like Whiff Wendell, and you've noticed something I've done wrong, please let me know. I like to think I've got this part figured out, that I've stared at the map enough that I've got it right. There might be a more efficient way to set up these convoys. I did ignore the resource in Cyprus. I did ignore the Persian resource. But this seemed like the most efficient use of the convoys to get what we needed to get going. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments or send a note on Board Game Geek. I'll get this posted to Board Game Geek as well. I think that does it for this video. To review, we have the USA set up, Austria-Hungary, Japan, Russia, and the Commonwealth. My next video, which I should hopefully get out maybe sometime later this week, will cover French setup, which is pretty straightforward, and then the German setup, which is more or less straightforward, though there's a lot to deal with, and then finally the initial Serbian setup, just to get that out of the way. Final comment, I guess, on the Commonwealth stuff. I set this up kind of loose, just knowing that Britain's going to need to send forces over, and that's going to be important. But having forces ready to fight the Ottomans is important. But you could kind of look at this any way you want and kind of come up with your own strategy. I'm sure there's some really smart ones out there, and I'm not experienced enough with the game to do it. If you're feeling like maybe I left the United Kingdom weakened, and that there's not a lot here to defend against an amphibious attack, know that there is inherent strength in hexes that are amphibiously attacked. And at the beginning of the game, there are reserves that are called into the game within the first turn or so. So, don't think, oh no, I've left the UK for an early 1914 Sea Lion. No. These reserve units will come in and will help defend the home island. Every faction has a reserve pool that will come in once they're actively at war and will fill up the ranks of the hexes that you have and the forces that you have. Though a special note is that in the latest rules there is a optional rule that if you keep some of your reserves in the pool, you get a morale savings or a morale boost, so to speak, which I think is a little more historical. For these demonstrations or whatever gameplay I show in the future, I won't use that option, but I think in any real game I play against players or a real solo game, I'm going to try to use that optional rule. I think it adds something to the game. You know, you're not going to call out every single man. Your country's going to slowly, or maybe not too slowly, but there's certainly a gradient there to go from the initial limited war to full total mobilization war that World War One really was. So something fun to throw into the game with the options. So okay, I've got my file saved. I'm going to chronic saver, so I'm going to save again, and that should just about do it. Thanks for watching. Expect the next video soon. Leave comments and thoughts, and there'll be more to come. Thanks.